Ladies and gents, welcome to another episode of Optimize Your Body podcast. And I've got a special guest on for the second time today, goes by the name of Dr. Ted Nyman. I'm not going to introduce you this time, Ted, and read out, the same thing I read out last time with your awesome bio and everything. But thanks for coming on again, man, for the second time. We had some amazing feedback from the last episode, and I appreciate you coming on again, man.
Oh, no, man. Great to talk to you. Love it. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. So, yeah, what I wanted to get stuck into today, first of all, Ted, just for people who haven't listened to the other episode, it's episode 66. In case anyone wants to check that out, it was September last year. Lots of gold in there. Just for the audience who haven't heard you before, would you mind just introducing yourself, Ted?
Oh, yeah, sure. No problem. I'm Ted Naiman. I'm a primary care doctor here in Seattle area, West Coast of the United States. And I'm basically just really interested into diet and exercise and health outcomes based on diet and exercise. So I do primary care and medicine. I'm down in the trenches, just seeing pretty much anybody, anytime for anything medical. And my whole 20-year career, I've just been obsessed with how different diet and exercise approaches can change your health trajectory, and I'm just surrounded by people who are super healthy and super unhealthy. And it turns out that the majority of the time, the big difference between those two groups of people are really just diet and exercise. And then for me, it's just, what are the biggest rocks in the jar? What are the 20% things that I can get my patients to do for diet and exercise that gives them 80% of the results? So that's kind of what I'm all about.
Awesome. And you talk a lot, right, Ted, about protein versus non-protein energy. And I know we touched on this last time, right? But Yep. You did say, really, I looked at someone recently that you mentioned actually, and it was quite fascinating because you said about if people could eat at least 20% of their diet was protein, then for the most part, it would kind of eliminate a lot of issues in terms of obesity and chronic illness and everything else. And it sounds quite simple on paper, right? But with where people are at today, it's a lot easier said than done, right? But do you think that's true then? Do you think 20% or more of your diet, if that consisted of protein, instead of, fat, sugar, you think that that would make a big difference to where we're at right now? Because obviously we're facing an obesity epidemic. And I found that quite interesting because I know we talked last time, you said 30 to 40%, which is, you could say optimal, or you could say, maybe me and you, I eat 30%, 35%, maybe you eat around that range, but it's not all about optimal, right? It's about what can people actually do? What's the low hanging fruit, right?
Right. Yeah, no, like if I could snap my fingers and everyone somehow dragged the protein percent of calories of their diet up to 20%, the obesity epidemic would more or less collapse. I mean, it would not be completely gone, but it would definitely reverse. Like it would, flatten out, start reversing. And I think that protein percent of calories is such a huge driver of ad lib energy intake in any animal, literally any animal, including humans. Humans, of course, are just animal. We're just basically monkeys that talk. So we're definitely animals. We're no different than any other animal. And if you can drag protein percent of calories up high enough, your ad lib energy intake just goes down and you cannot eat as much and you find it very hard to overeat. So yes, the whole obesity epidemic would really collapse at 20% of calories from protein. Now, if you go to 30%, you're just going to see some extreme situations, like, in studies, you see a 100% prediabetes reversal rate. So that's very dramatic. It's very extreme. It's also very hard to sustain, and you can't eat a lot of donuts and pizza. You can't fit those in to those macros. So adherence is going to be a problem as you get higher and higher.
It's super fascinating, right, Ted, how I feel like we're almost trying to go back to where we were, not as hunter-gatherers, right, where the average age of death was probably around about 30. I mean, we're not trying to go back to that. We're trying to get more longevity. But it's interesting, like I've got this 8 Sleep thing, right? And I was thinking about this the other day. I'm not sure if you've heard of 8 Sleep. I'm not sponsored by them or nothing, but shout them out. Mm-hmm. And I bought it and I thought, you know what? It's interesting how now it's like I would have thought back when we were hunter-gatherers, for example, we would have slept better naturally because we would have woke up when the sun rises, slept in the cave, hunted in the daytime. But now I feel like we've got technology, we've got all these processed foods and all these kind of things, and we're just more stressed and everything else, right? And we've got more stimulus. We've got the blue light, all these kind of things. I'm thinking, wow, I'm spending, 4,000 Australian dollars just to try and get good sleep. You know what I mean? And I feel like it's kind of similar with diet as well, because you did mention before about hunter-gatherers. You would have thought, give or take, we're going to be hunting an animal. naturally we're probably going to be more in that kind of optimal range, right? Where it's like 30 to 40% protein. We'd hunt an animal and eat it. And then you mentioned something before about eating leaves, right? Eating leaves off a tree. It's still going to be, in terms of the energy versus protein balance, still going to be about 40 to 50% protein, right? But it's not so much the case anymore, right, Ted? With most of the
Yeah,
foods, you know what I mean, that we see in the supermarket and stuff.
right. Yeah, there's a lot of things about actual paleo dieting that I would not want to sign up for, and that's like the lack of pasteurization and the fact that you're getting food poisoning every other time you eat anything. I'm sure that there's some downsides to like actually being a hunter-gatherer. But the point is, if you're just eating animals, eating what they're supposed to be eating, and wild plants, the protein percent of the food you can find is extraordinarily high, way higher than standard American diet. And by some estimates, hunter-gatherer populations eat, north of 30% of their calories from protein. And that is just so much higher than pretty much any other non-hunter-gatherer group that there's no wonder that you just don't see obesity and obesity-related diseases in these hunter gatherers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Speaking of protein then, right? So I know you mentioned just then, you said 20%. You think that would, why do you think, I'd love to know why you think 20% or more, if people ate, because I think you said as well, is it on average, people tend to have, I saw you mentioned something about 10 to 12.5% protein out of their total calories. Is that right? Give or take? Or is that the amount where it's just far from ideal?
Yeah, I mean, globally, it's about 15% of calories. In America, it's a little lower. It's maybe 12 and a half, something like that. Definitely been falling over the past 60 or 70 years with the obesity epidemic. And the 20% number comes from, well, a number of lines of evidence. First of all, there's a national weight loss registry in this country where anyone who's lost a certain percentage of body weight and kept it off for a certain length of time can be entered into this registry. And if you look at the one thing they all have in common, almost everyone in there has gotten protein up to at least about 19% of calories. And that is very tightly conserved throughout this group of successful, long-term, sustainable weight loss persons. And you don't see any other feature in common. Like there's carbs are all over the board, fat is all over the board, the carb-fat mixture is all over the place. The quantity of exercise, the intensity of exercise, the volume of exercise, tons of variability in every other thing. Intermittent fasting, the feeding window, like anything you could look at. The one thing that they seem to have in common is dragging the protein percent calories up several percentage points, which is huge. So for every 1% of protein that you go up in that range, you would decrease your energy intake by about 10%. It's like a 10 to 1 gear ratio where you crank the protein percent of calories up 1% and you eat 10% less calories. It's very dramatic.
Wow. So I know we have the thermic effect of food and we have the fact that protein blunts your appetite. Do you think there's any other variables? Because when we tend to eat more fats and carbs, we're less satiated, right? As you always talk about as well. But I would guess there's quite a few variables, but at the same time, it's probably quite simple, right? Blunts your appetite more, thermic effect of food, and then you eat less of the foods, which I guess are more highly palatable.
Yeah, it's basically all those things. So you just get a huge satiety effect from the amino acids in your bloodstream. So that's the biggest one. The other one is it's less hedonic than high energy density carbs and fats together. So like your donuts and your pizza and your cookies and your candy bars, these are all fairly low protein, but they have really high energy density carbs and fats together, and they're super tasty and hedonic. So the high protein stuff is not only ultra satiating because the protein and the amino acids just make you really satiated, but it's just not very hedonic either. It's just not that much fun to eat skinless chicken breasts and egg whites. So there's a multitude of reasons, but it is a very powerful factor when it comes to the ad lib energy intake of just any animal. And then we have animal studies where you can just feed lab animals higher and higher protein percents of calories, and they will literally just eat fewer and fewer calories on an ad lib diet. You feed lab rats and mice a 50% protein diet by calories, and you'll just have the thinnest, most ripped and jacked lab rodents you've ever seen. And if obviously you can't do this to humans, and on a 50% protein diet by calories, you would be just hungry all the time. You'd be very lean, very hungry, and you wouldn't be eating more because you can't overeat protein. I mean, I could give you all the skinless chicken breasts in the world, and you're going to eat a couple, and then you will just stop eating, and that's kind of how it works.
And I love the way you break things down. I've got to say, I was just saying to my girlfriend, actually, you are a true game changer in this space because you make things so simple and digestible for people. And it is very simple on paper, like we say, having more protein, but people struggle to do that consistently. And I've seen from, if I'm looking at the average person that I coach, I coach a lot of people who are already at a good level, but a big chunk of my clients are, just gem pop. And they, for example, might do good in the week, then they might grossly undereat protein on the weekends. And that's when the calories tend to creep up because, again, you're less satiated. So it is actually quite simple. And that's why I love, what you talk about with the PE diet. And again, I'm not going to delve too deep into that because we covered that on the last episode. But talking about body composition, right, Ted? People want to improve the way their body looks. They want to build muscle, strip body fat, get into incredible shape physically, because I always say the physical shape is essentially the byproduct anyway of your decisions, right? That look of health is essentially your decision making and your discipline. What do you think the big rocks people are? So we've covered protein, right? So there's anything else you feel like we've missed with diet in terms of body composition? Great. Then I'd like you to touch on the other macronutrients and like fats and carbs, and if they make a difference to body composition. And there's obviously alcohol as well, right? So that's another macronutrient as well. So those are the three. Do you feel like they make a difference to body composition by themselves?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, so every single person who comes to see you as a client and every single patient who comes to see me really has a solitary goal, and that's higher lean mass and lower fat mass. That's what everybody wants. That's what everyone needs. You want basically a lower fat mass and higher fat-free mass or lean mass. You're trying to get more muscle and less fat at the same time. That makes you look better. That makes you feel better. That makes you perform better. That gives you better metabolic parameters, way better insulin sensitivity. It's kind of the holy grail is more muscle and less fat at the exact same time. And to be perfectly honest, protein is the macronutrient to accomplish that. First of all, the protein supports your lean mass, right? If you don't eat enough protein, not only can you not gain lean mass, you're just going to steadily lose lean mass and catabolize all that protein for amino acids because you have to have 50 grams of protein a day just to be alive. So you're going to catabolize that if you're not eating enough protein. So protein supports your lean mass. Carbs and fats really just support your fat mass. So every single bit of fat you eat is immediately stored as fat, where you may or may not burn it later. That's just how the system works. And then things like carbs and alcohol basically displace fat oxidation until you burn them off, right? So if you're doing a ton of exercise, you can get away with those. You'll just burn them off. But if you're not, they're eventually stored as fat as well. So the other macronutrients are really just energy. They're just there to support your fat mass and your stored energy. So protein supports your lean mass, carbs and fats support your fat mass. And it's kind of a no-brainer which one you'd want to prioritize when you're after this holy grail that we're all looking for of more muscle, less fat. So the protein should come first. You should prioritize the protein. And then not only is protein improving lean mass, but it's also providing the satiety so you're not overeating non-protein energy calories, carbs, and fats, right? So it's kind of doing both things at the same time. But either way, it's really all coming at protein.
Dude, the way you explain things, again, that's something that I learned in terms of the way I can communicate things. It's so simple to communicate to the average person. Protein supports lean mass. I know this anyway, but to break it down like that, protein supports lean mass and the other macronutrients, in other words, fats and carbs, essentially an energy source, and they support fat mass. That's such a simple, effective way to break it down. And I wanted to touch on this today, Ted, in terms of alcohol, the other macronutrient. I don't think I've heard you talk about this before. What would you say in regards to alcohol? We all know it's terrible for you. There's no way around that. How would you say that impacts people? Because it's not, people say calories in, calories out, right? Law of thermodynamics. We can't deny that. Got to burn more than you eat to actually lose weight, etc. But there's a lot more going on when you drink alcohol than just 7 calories per gram. You know what I mean? There's a lot more going on in the body. So what's your thoughts on that anyway, as a macronutrient and the impact?
Right. Well, alcohol is interesting because it's very volatile. So it has a very high oxidative priority. In other words, you have to burn alcohol off immediately. You have absolutely no storage for it. So alcohol displaces other fuels out of the bloodstream, and you will just burn only alcohol until it's all gone before you go back to burning anything else. So the oxidative priorities, alcohol first, carbs second. Well, carbs and protein are kind of tied in there, and then fats sort of dead last. And so you're burning fat until anything else comes along and displaces the fat oxidation, and then you burn that instead. But alcohol goes boom, straight to the front of the line. It's the most volatile fuel we've got, has the highest oxidative priority. You can't store it at all. You literally have to burn it off until it's all gone. That has a couple of consequences. Well, first of all, your fat oxidation just completely stops until your alcohol calories are gone. But for some reason, when the alcohol wears off, people are just super hungry. I don't know if there's a delay when you ramp up your fat oxidation again or what, but alcohol is the worst preload of all. So we do these preload studies where you give somebody a snack and then 2 hours later they hit the buffet and you weigh and measure how much they eat, right? Ad lib diet buffet. You just eat all you want. So the best preload is protein. You give somebody protein, and an hour or two later, they go to the buffet, they eat way less calories. You give somebody carbs and fats, junk food, something hedonic like a donut, not a good preload. People actually eat more later at the buffet than if they never ate anything to begin with. So that's like those calories don't help you at all. They're actually negative. Alcohol is the worst preload of all. So you will actually eat far more 2 hours later after drinking alcohol than any other thing you'd have prior. So alcohol's doing a bunch of bad stuff. First of all, it's completely shutting off oxidation of fat and other fuels until it's all gone. Secondly, it has a very high energy density, 7 kcals per gram. So that's way higher than carbs and protein. So you've got this high caloric density. You've got a super high oxidative priority. So everything else gets shut off until it's gone. And then you've got this weird after effect where you're just super hungry when it's all burned off, for whatever reason that I don't think I could actually explain. And you just get to eat more downstream. So then throw in the fact that it's literally a class 1 carcinogen. So alcohol is a carcinogen. Everyone's sitting around like, oh, what if what if my artificial sweetener is maybe a class 2 where nobody knows for sure? Oh, well, alcohol is class 1. It will give you cancer. It causes 22 different cancers, literally causes them. All of your upper GI cancers. So your esophageal cancer, pancreatic cancer, gastric cancer, liver cancer, upper GI. If you want an upper GI cancer, you just want to drink a lot of alcohol. So there's a ton of reasons not to drink alcohol. It literally destroys cells in your central nervous system. When we have chronic alcoholics and we MRI their brain and do a volumetric analysis, you can see their brain is literally just shrunk down. Their cerebellum's just shrunk way down. All their normative percentile volumes are just super, super low. And it's literally killing your brain, shrinking your brain, causing cancer, making you hungrier later and eat more calories. There's not a lot of redeeming qualities. To be perfectly honest, I don't drink a ton of alcohol. I'll have like, 1 drink every 2 or 3 months or something. I mean, I'm not like, oh, I can never drink again. It's just not really aligned with my fitness goals. And there's not a good reason to drink it at all. So I don't get invited to a lot of parties. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. It's funny you say that because on the weekend it was my girlfriend's birthday and I had a few. She doesn't drink, which is great. But I had a few, and I'm like you, I just have, 1, 2, maybe 3 if I'm pushing it really far, Ted, nowadays. I'll have a few. And yeah, the impact on sleep. I actually took my Oura ring off, right? Because I tracked my sleep into the Oura ring. I took it off because I was like, you know what? I'm just going to give myself a break for a couple of days because even that 1 to 2 drinks, if I drink it, I've calculated before, if I have it in the daytime, it's fine. If I have it close to bed. So I do wonder, Ted, based on what you were saying then, how much of that impact is on sleep, right? Because the research is kind of interesting in terms of the cognitive dysfunction you mentioned there and the shrinking of the brain and everything else. But we know how important sleep is, right? And the link between the studies on sleep and Alzheimer's and everything else. So I would guess that kind of plays a part in it, but it's hard to pinpoint that, isn't it? You know what I mean? Because how are you going
Oh
to
yeah. Well, alcohol is known to be very disruptive to sleep architecture. So all of your sleep medicine doctors will tell you just how bad alcohol is. And a lot of people will drink at the end of the day. They'll drink in the evening to self-medicate anxiety. They're trying to be relaxed. They're trying to fall asleep. And it will render you kind of tired and sleepy. But your actual sleep architecture, like your REM sleep, your deep sleep, the sleep architecture is disrupted. It's not as good. It's not as restful. It's kind of not really doing what you want from it there. So again, just not a lot of really great stuff about alcohol. And not to mention, I've watched a lot of patients just literally drink themselves to death, just actually dying from alcohol. So I'm not a huge fan. And again, like nobody's really asking me to go hit the bars. You know what I mean? I'm just not that much fun.
I'm the same as well. I'm actually going out with someone this weekend, and it was like I was reluctant, but I was like, "No, you've got to make an effort. It's their birthday, just do it." But for us, it's almost like you're taking a hit, right? It's like I got to say, I'm not going to drink, but even just going out and then you're out later, then it's to sleep. But speaking of sleep as well, Ted, it has a massive impact, right? And the research is clear when it comes to diet as well, decision making with food. I think I read something recently where people ate quite a big study done. They ate 44% more calories when they were sleep deprived. Not to mention, there's some research to show about the metabolic rate and everything else. So, how much of an impact would you say that plays? Because most people are sleep deprived as well. There's a kind of like an epidemic on everything nowadays. I keep using that word, but most people are sleep deprived. Do you think that's impacting people's decision making with food and the obesity epidemic?
Oh yeah, it's huge. I mean, the studies are just absurd. Like you just sleep deprive somebody for a day, and the amount they eat goes way up. Their choices go straight to hell. Like they're literally picking more hedonic foods. They're eating more of them, and it's not that good. Even if you're not eating, your insulin sensitivity tends to be worse just because your cortisol is higher. So like it's just bad. So sleep deprivation is really bad. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. But I just want to switch gears back to protein because I've heard you talk about muscle protein synthesis, and again, there's a lot of research on this in terms of distribution of protein. But I'm always kind of like a little bit, for me, again, it depends on who you're speaking to. I feel like it can be split in hairs for the average person because, like I said to you, the average person grossly under eating protein and overeating calories. So, like, my goal is always how can we get them to hit a protein target first? Then we can kind of discuss the distribution after. But I'd love to know your input on that in terms of muscle protein synthesis, in terms of how much protein you should eat per meal and the distribution.
Right. So I used to be very worried about this. So you had to have small, frequent meals. You had to, 20, 30 grams, 6 times a day and things like that. And just lately, the research really shows that you just don't have to be that worried about it. We do have research that shows that 3 protein feedings is slightly better than 2. So it might be, reasonable to have 3 meals a day. And it might be reasonable to distribute your protein a little bit, but you don't have to be that worried about it. I mean, even my patients eating 1 meal a day, which I don't recommend, seem to get by, so it's possible. I don't think that's optimal. I do think it's probably optimal to have about 3 protein feedings a day in a fairly wide time restricted feeding, like maybe a 16-8, 3 meals, reasonable bolus of protein at each meal, 30 to 50 grams, depending on how large you are. So that's just what I'd be telling the average person, try to eat, 30 to 50 grams 3 times a day, kind of a minimum if you're really trying to optimize.
Awesome. And no pun intended, but optimize your body, right? Because if you're looking to improve your body composition, then the reality is these are the big rocks that Ted's touched on there. So if you want to, and we talked about metabolic health and all the health markers and everything on the last episode, but you talked about something I found really interesting was personal fat threshold and fat cells. I'd love you to give, speaking of body composition, just give the audience a bit more of an insight into what you mean by that. And just give us a quick insight into fat cells and kind of how they work.
Gotcha. Okay. So everything you eat has to get stored somewhere, right? The amino acids from your protein usually get used by the various tissues in your body that need protein. Any leftover does get burned. It has a very high thermic effect, which means it costs a lot of calories to try to burn protein as calories. So it's very inefficient. That's why it's really hard to get fat from overeating protein. It's almost impossible, but the extra protein you eat does get oxidized and burned because you don't have a really good place to store it once all your muscles have taken the amino acids they need and the other tissues. So the protein has to either go into your tissues, support your lean mass, or get oxidized. Pretty much all the fat that you eat goes straight to your fat cells and mechanically has no other place to go because fat's not water soluble. So it literally has to end up in your fat cells, these specialized places to store fat, right? Carbohydrate basically has to be stored as glycogen either in your liver or your muscles. You have very finite storage for carbohydrate. You can only store maybe 300 grams in your muscles, 100 grams in your liver. Now fat is where everything ends up when you overeat calories, right? If you eat hundreds of grams of carb, you will convert some extra into fat. When you eat lots of fat, all that fat's getting stored in your fat cells. The fat cells have a maximum diameter that they cannot exceed. The cell membrane won't let them get any bigger, right? So your fat cells will actually multiply, but the amount of fat cells you can eventually have is genetically determined, right? So some people can make just trillions of fat cells and they can be 600 pounds and they're just like huge. Other people are very limited. They have a limited number of fat cells they can sprout. And like people, from Southeast Asia, for example, they you might never see them on my 600-pound life. They just cannot generate that many fat cells, right? They're very limited. So you have this genetic ceiling to how many fat cells you can make. Now, if all of your fat cells have a maximum diameter, maybe 200 microns, they physically can't get bigger, and you can only generate so many fat cells. What happens when you eat more fat than that? It has no place to go. So fat first gets stored in your subcutaneous cells. Once you fill them all up, you can't generate any new ones. Then they get stored in your visceral fat. And once you fill those up and you can't generate new ones, now you've got fat just floating around in your bloodstream. Now you've got metabolic syndrome, you've got insulin resistance, you got high triglycerides all the time. Then you've shoved all the fat into every cell that it will possibly hold. And now your blood sugar is too high because all your cells are like, we don't want any fat, we don't want any glucose. So every cell in your body is like in refusal mode. And that's when you have like severe insulin resistance and diabetes. And that's the personal fat threshold. It's basically how many fat cells can you sprout, and then they all have a maximum diameter, and that's how much fat you can hold. And if you overeat that, you're diabetic. Even if you're super lean, even if you visibly look thin and you don't have a lot of visible fat, you're still diabetic.
Listen up. If you're looking to drop fat and optimize your metabolic health, or you feel like your results have stalled, I'm giving away a free metabolic assessment. And this assessment gives you a metabolic score, which tells you the best path to take to get the fastest, most sustainable results possible, whether your goal will be fat loss, building muscle, or both, and obviously how to optimize your metabolic health and overall health. All you've got to do to get this free assessment is click the link beneath in the show notes. All right, back to the episode. Much sense, right? When you explain it like that, there's only so much the fat cells can take, isn't it? And then it's like, I can't take
exactly
more. It's pretty straightforward. Right? But again, not easy. And that comes down to the behaviors and everything else, right? But just to summarize them with diet, the most important thing really is obviously making sure you're getting, would you say 20% minimum? Would you say that as a baseline of your calories are coming from protein? And I think you mentioned before that I say the same thing as well. And most of the audience are in America, so they'll get this, a gram per pound of body weight. You would say if you can shoot for that for the average person, but even that's kind of, I find some people are eating, not even 0.5 grams per pound of body weight, people who are grossly under eating. So
yeah, absolutely right. I would say that for your average person, 20% of calories from protein as a minimum, unless you're burning thousands of calories a day running ultra marathons or something, and then you can just drink oil or whatever you want, But for an average, moderately active person, 20% of your calories minimum for protein, and aiming for a gram per pound of ideal body weight based on your height, what you'd weigh if you were super lean, perfect body composition for your height.
Got it. Fasting. I'd love to pick your brains on this. Fasting for fat, because I get so many people who say, I've been fasting because I'm trying to lose weight. And my thing is, it could be a great tool. Again, going back to ancient times, it seems like we would have had to hunt animals and then sometimes go without food. So it seems like the body is adapted by, doing some good things. So what's your thoughts on fasting, number one, and the research for weight loss, and number two, for just overall health and longevity?
Right. So, personally, I think fasting is definitely on a U-shaped curve where if you fast too long, it actually starts to be detrimental. Um, but then if you're just if you're just snacking and grazing all day long, that's bad because you never really get in touch with hunger and fullness. So, there's this U-shaped curve where there's like, too much snacking and then like way too much extended fasting to the point that you're losing lean mass and getting super hungry when you do eat and making the wrong choices. So personally, I kind of like a 16-8. I mean, I'm sure everyone's a little bit different in terms of what they could get away with or what's optimal for them. And there's plenty of room for individualization. But if you just put a gun to my head and I had to design a intermittent fasting plan for the whole planet, just like on average, it would be a 16-8. And in that 8 hour feeding window, you'd have, 2 large boluses of protein bookending that thing, and then medium one in the middle somewhere. And I think that would get a lot of people sort of close to optimum, with the caveat that, everyone's a little bit different, and some people are going to do better with more or less.
Of course, yeah. I eat 2 big meals a day, big amount of protein with each meal.
Yeah, I'm usually doing a 16/8. I'm usually having a really big protein bolus at the beginning and the end of that. And then I'm also eating again in the middle, either a snack or a meal, just depending on where I'm at, what I'm doing, how much time I have. So it's usually 2 meals in a snack or 3 meals in a 16/8 kind of setup. Yeah, that's pretty much the breakdown for me.
I feel like we've talked about it in the right order of priority as well, right? All the other stuff we talked about with protein, because for you and I, we've been in this game for a long time now, right? Taking care of ourselves, eating well, a long journey, but now we naturally want to have the amount of protein that we need. We naturally want that each meal. And then the fasting then kind of comes after that in terms of priority, because I feel like a lot of people, they're not eating enough protein or enough good quality food. And then they're like, I'm going to eat 1 meal a day. And it's a bit extreme. It's not really sustainable for most people, I would say. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the problem with fasting is it doesn't actually teach you what to eat, how to eat. You got to eat something. Like anyone can fast, just not eating and just sitting there and not eating is easy. Well, it's not easy, but it's a no-brainer. But then when it's time to eat, what are you going to actually eat? And a lot of my patients don't have the skill of like picking food, choosing food, procuring food, having food available, all the external setup to have the right things to eat available, like making the choices, having the food, cooking the food, having recipes, like actually mechanically, what are you going to eat? That's the hard part. You have to eat, everyone has to eat. You have to eat, hundreds of grams of macros. You have to eat pounds of food. You have to eat all day, every day, all the time. And fasting doesn't teach you any of that. It doesn't help you with any of that. So it's just kind of limited.
Love the way you broke that down, because you do need to, and there's so much. I say this, I feel like I say this every podcast, but there's so much variance from person to person, right? When it comes to nutrition, that's why give someone a meal plan, and it'll work until it doesn't work, right? When you get these generic, it's just not. It doesn't work like that with human behavior. You got to meet people where they're at, right? With your patients and stuff, and you see yourselves. Everyone's so different, and you got to meet them where they're at and make 1 or 2 changes they can actually stick to. And as you say, if you're not taking care of the fundamentals, like maybe having lean protein available, preparing your meals, the disciplines, and actually turning those kind of behaviors of prepping your food, having lean protein available, recipes, as you say, meals you actually enjoy eating, and turning them into habits, right? Which doesn't happen overnight. Then it's going to be a battle, right? To say the least, if you're going to throw yourself straight into fasting. So, cheers for covering that. What are your go? I know again, it depends on the person, depends on where they're at, what nutrient deficiencies they have, and everything else. But supplements, for me, I find a go-to supplement for everyone, and I've looked into the research recently, is creatine in terms of health and performance. Are there any kind of supplements you find maybe yourself using, and supplements that you feel like most people would probably benefit from? And I know it depends, but I guess what I'm trying to say is common nutrient deficiencies as well. So I know vitamin D is kind of at the top, for example.
Right. Yeah, I personally, I don't take a ton of supplements. I don't recommend a ton of supplements. There's a very short list that I'm ever really recommending to anyone. I honestly don't take creatine, but I think some people, I mean, the less meat you eat, the more you're going to benefit from creatine. Let's put it that way. And some people should be taking creatine, especially anyone who's on a plant-based diet or not eating a lot of meat. I highly recommend that. Vitamin D, it depends on your latitude. If your skin tone matches the latitude your ancestors have been at for a long time, then you probably don't need it. But if you have a mismatch between what your skin's expecting from the sun and what you're actually getting, then you should probably be on vitamin D. If you're not eating, fatty fish several times a week, you might consider some fish oil. If your diet quality is not that great, then it becomes more important to maybe take some magnesium or a multivitamin or something like that. There's of course some supplements I recommend for people on restrictive diets. So if you're a vegan, you're going to be low on iron, you're going to be low on B12, you're going to be low on zinc, you're going to be low on selenium. If you're a pure carnivore, you're going to be low on magnesium, you're going to be low on folate. So I do have supplements I recommend for like fringe groups, and I am looking for people who have medical problems like pernicious anemia or something where they're actually deficient in something. People who've had, bariatric surgery or have inflammatory bowel disease or something like that. They're gonna basically have a lot of supplements they need to take. But for the average person, it's a pretty short list. It's really very, very, very short, honestly.
I'm exactly the same. I don't take anything. I take ashwagandha. I find that really helps with my sleep quality and stress management. But again, everyone's individual. And the big piece here is diet, right? A supplement is
Right.
to supplement a good diet, right? So
Yeah,
cover the diet
exactly.
first. So that's pretty complex. So that takes a lot of work, right? So just focus on that piece. I love that. Weights versus cardio. I'd love to pick your brain on this because I get some pushback on this in terms of for body composition specifically. I say cardio is just not, it's just not necessary. It doesn't, you don't need to do it for body composition. It's a case of, diet and weight training. And then also, obviously, if you can do movement, so you can increase your NEAT, and then save your intensity for the weight room. But I'd love to know your thoughts on weights versus cardio for body composition.
I mean, I really think everybody should be doing both. Like, honestly, the nice thing about cardio is it raises your VO2 max, and that's very associated with longevity. And so I think cardio is important. I don't think it's really doing as much for body composition as diet and resistance training. So I'm all in on the diet and resistance training, of course, for body comp. But I do think cardio is important. I highly recommend it. Everyone should be touching like a high end of heart rate and intensity for cardio, just like they're going all out and going maybe all the way to failure on a couple sets a week for resistance training. I kind of recommend doing the same thing with your maximum heart rate a few times a week, just to up your VO2 max and increase your cardiorespiratory fitness. And honestly, just like being strong is a superpower where you just walk through life picking up heavy stuff and it's no problem. Being in really good cardio shape is a superpower too. You can just run up a couple dozen flights of stairs and everybody else is like sucking wind and you feel great. So it's really, I think it's critical to be in good cardio fitness, just like it is to have plenty of muscle. So honestly, I don't like to be like, oh, cardio or resistance. It's like you got to do both. Everybody should be doing both. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. But you would say in terms of like, if you want to improve the way your body looks, you can do both. And you wouldn't say cardio then is going to impede necessarily, if you do an appropriate amount, of course, impede on results when it comes to purely just body composition. You would say do them
Right,
both.
right. Yeah, I mean, we used to be all so worried about the interference effect, and that's really just basically been overblown massively, and it doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. And so I'm not afraid of cardio. I'm not worried about resistance interference effect from cardio. And so I think people can definitely do both. I don't see why you couldn't.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to the appropriate amount of exercise. I feel like people take things so far. They might be lifting weights, doing a really intense training program. Then they're going to throw in lots of and they kind of push it a bit too far, or they're not consistent enough, right? So after you said it, it stuck in my head actually, Ted, because you said this last time, and I was like, I know I need to do more cardio because I stopped jujitsu, and I thought, right, I got to find something. So I'm doing volleyball now, which is great because it involves a bit of the short bursts of energy. I get nature as well. I'm on the sand, unstable surfaces. So yeah, and I've noticed actually what I think people need to pay attention to as well is it actually you probably noticed this, right? So I know you're very fit. You play, what's the hobby that you've got? Again, is it
Ultimate frisbee?
ultimate frisbee?
Yes.
That's so much fun, man.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had a game the other day, and it's actually more technical than it looks as well. Just
Yeah. I mean, you can get super technical, just like every team sport.
yeah, 100%. But yeah, I feel like it carries over into weight training as well. So you probably notice because you're fit, when you lift weights, you got more stamina. It was a noticeable difference for me. I noticed anyway.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Anything you do exercise, you get more stamina, and it's just spectacular, and that's why everybody needs to be doing it.
100%. And what would you say ideally for the average person for exercise if they could stick to a regime per week? Let's say someone normally exercises 2-3 times a week. Let's say 3 times a week. They were just going to exercise 3 times a week. That's all they had time for. How would you kind of program that? But providing they were going to do a lot of movement as well, they were going to do adequate steps. Let's say they're doing 10K steps a day, so they're relatively active. What would you say? 3 times a week, how would you kind of advise? I know it depends on
Got it.
them, but I just love to know what you think.
Right. I mean, I would say do full body resistance training at least twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. So it would basically be some sort of push, some sort of pull, some sort of leg exercise, some sort of hinge. So if you only exercise 3 times a week, I would have you do a couple sets of push, pull, legs, hinge, and then some sort of high end cardio. You're doing some sort of sprinting or rowing machine or elliptical or treadmill or whatever you like to do. It's basically cardio, and then push pull legs, hinge, full body resistance. And if everybody spent, even just a half an hour doing one set of all of those moves and then 5 or 10 minutes of high end cardio, the return on investment would be stratospheric. It would be so huge for most people. I mean, your average American gets less than 1 minute of high intensity exercise a day. So you really don't have to put that much time investment in it to get massive results, because most people just aren't doing any.
Yeah, I love that. Full body, hip hinge. By hip hinge, you mean just kind of when you're sliding your hips back, picking stuff up from the ground, like deadlifts kind of stuff?
Right. Deadlift, or if you're doing body weight, it's just bridging or something like that.
Fantastic, fantastic. There we go. It doesn't have to be much. And that's why I think we always talk about this, the all or nothing mentality. I think a lot of it comes down to mindset. That's a whole other podcast, Ted, but it is that, right? It's all or nothing for a lot of people. And it's like, no, actually, if you just consider, I always say this, the person who chips away for a whole year at doing those 3 sessions, right? 30 minutes weights, 5, 10, 15 minutes cardio intense, 5, 10 minutes, like you said, over the space of a year. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. As you say, even over the space of like 3 months, you're literally reinventing yourself and you're transforming your health. It's crazy. So yeah, awesome stuff. I wanted to tap a little bit deeper into why you think, Ted, because we've got the information. We've got people like you. I'm putting a lot of great stuff out there on this thing. We're getting more information, but essentially we're getting fatter and sicker on a global scale as well, especially in Western countries, even in Australia as well. Same kind of deal, not as bad, obviously, with the obesity rate in America. But are there any particular factors that stand out to you that you're thinking like, well, okay, people know what to do for the most part. Why are they not doing it?
Like everybody knows what they should be doing, but they're not doing it. I'll tell you why. It's because humans are just wired to literally expend as few calories as possible and then ingest as many calories as possible. I mean, if you think about hunter-gatherers, right? Every single day, it's an economics equation that's life or death. If I spend the whole day tracking down a gazelle and hunting it and killing it and then cooking it, if I get 2,000 calories back from that thing, but I spent 2,001 calories hunting it all day and killing it, preparing it, I'm dead. I'm dead in a month. I'm dead in maybe a couple days. You know what I'm saying? So every single day was this life or death economics equation for everybody when we were hunter gatherers. And that's baked into us all. Your whole goal in life is to ingest as many calories as you can while expending as few calories as possible. That's the only way to survive the famine that's coming up or the winter time. Right. So it's just completely Sisyphean. Every single one of us is wired to eat as much as we can and expend as little energy as we can, which is the exact opposite of what you have to do to get this ideal body composition with more lean mass and less fat mass. It's all about like, eating fewer calories and lifting. So the way we're wired is the exact opposite of what we have to try to make ourselves do now. And the food environment, it's so bad. We've completely disconnected movement from survival. Like I can just sit on the couch with Uber Eats and my phone. I never even have to move. We used to have to, just walk like just miles and expend so much energy just to be alive, just to get food and just to get water and just to not get not to die from predation, right? So you used to have to move to survive. Now you can just sit there and you don't have to move at all. So the caloric expenditure just collapsed because nobody ever has to move to survive at all. And then we're wired to eat as many calories as we can while expending as few as possible. That's why we invented tools. That's why we're always looking for an easier way to do stuff. That's why we have remote controls and like Uber Eats. And it's that's so you're just fighting human nature constantly. And every single day is a war of like what you really want to do because that's how you're wired, but then what you should be doing to optimize. And it's tough. It's really, really tough. You have to start small. You have to turn it into a habit. You have to build on it. You have to do progressive overload. It's not easy, but you're trying to get people to do the opposite of what they're naturally inclined to do. That's the basic problem.
100%. All those external factors are working against us in this day and age, right? It's literally gone the other way. It goes back to what we were saying at the start. I've invested all this money just to try and optimize my sleep, and this 8 sleep things blow it up, right? Again, I'm not sponsored. thing, but it's because again, we've got all those factors going against not just sleep, but it's diet and also with exercise. And I was just thinking then, Ted, it's like, imagine you said to your ancestors, I'm going to go and lift some heavy weights and just burn some calories, right? They'd be like, what are you doing? I'm
Yeah,
struggling.
you're gonna die.
Yeah, you're going to
Yeah,
die.
unless you're getting food from that, you're dead. That's just not, you don't have the calories for that. So yeah, you're right. It's the exact opposite of how we're wired. Everybody.
100% is opposite to how we're wired. We've got more food available to us than any other time in human history. And then obviously we've got technology and Uber Eats, as you touched on then, where we don't actually have to move at all to get it. Like literally you can get a McDonald's. You don't have to go to the drive-through. You don't have to walk to your car.
Nope, absolutely not. I do have to waddle from the couch to my front door to get the delivery, but that's it.
Exactly. When you said waddle now, I don't know why. I just thought of Cartman off South Park, the way he
Oh
waddles.
yeah, exactly.
I'd love to just kind of wrap this up with tell us a bit more. I'm sure the audience would be intrigued as well. And I did see that you went to, was it Sweden recently? Not recently, sorry. I think it was last year to do the launch for the Harbor app and everything else.
Right.
And I looked into it yesterday, actually, into the actual app, and it looks like it could be revolutionary.
Oh, it's super cool. It's super cool. Okay, so I'm working with Dr. Andreas Einfeld for this Hava app. You can check it out at hava.co. It's an app for the iPhone and all of your Android phones on the Google Play Store. And it's just a super cool way of you take a picture of your food and it tells you, first of all, it tracks all your macros, calories, protein, carbs, fat, but it also tells you energy density and fiber grams and hedonics. And the goal is the whole app is set up there. There's two things you're trying to do. Number one, hit a protein goal. It's like, okay, you want to eat this many grams of protein per day. That's your job. But while you're eating that protein, you're trying to keep your overall diet within a sort of U-shaped satiety per calorie curve where, all of your cookies and your ice cream is like a 0. And then your celery and egg whites is like 100, and you can't sustain either one of those. You want to be around a 50 or so. But you can basically look at your choices before and then sort of tweak them and lower the energy density a little. You're eating things that are lower carb, lower fat, higher fiber, higher protein, higher water, lower energy density, less hedonic. And you get this satiety score and a protein total. And if you can achieve your protein goal and keep your satiety per calorie in a certain range, then you just automatically eat less calories. It's very cool. It's evidence-based. It's just this cool algorithm where you just take pictures of all your food and it kind of tells you how you're doing. I think it's it's novel. Nobody else has really done this. And it's really helpful. I mean, it's kind of like, okay, now so you're a bodybuilder. You know that it really just comes down to protein and calories, right? That's it. That's just protein and calories. But that's not quite entirely true because all of your bodybuilders know that it is protein and calories, but you don't want to just eat junk food calories because you're just going to be hungry all the time. So you want to eat like your, carbs from oatmeal and apples and carrots. And you want to eat your fats from avocado and fish. And you don't want to just eat junk food calories because you're hungry all the time. So you're basically choosing carbs and fats that are less refined, that have more water, more fiber. So it is protein and calories, but you're also getting lower energy density, less refined carbs and fats, so that you feel fuller while you're eating less calories. And that's the secret. It's like eat protein, keep the carb and fat density lower, using this satiety score. You know what I mean? And then you're kind of doing what the bodybuilders are doing, but it's just a lot easier, and you don't have to think about it quite as hard when you've got an app like this because it just kind of tells you what your choices give you.
And the great thing is, you're still learning, right? Because as you're doing it, you're taking the photo, but then it's breaking things down. So you're still learning and getting the awareness and everything that you need, but you're just doing it in a much simpler, let's just say it, more easy way, because that's what people want. Is hard enough, like we just said, behaviors, habits, and everything else. You don't need to add in another barrier, right, to success. So I like that.
Right. Yeah. So you're like, oh, hey, an apple's not too bad. It's a 44. Oh, but it has no protein at all. It's just good because it's like lots of weight and volume and fiber for hardly any calories. So it's a low energy density, high fiber. And then you're like, oh, okay, so I can pair that with like some non-fat Greek yogurt or egg white scramble or skillet chicken breast or something. And now I've got like tons of protein, super good satiety score, and you're learning the whole time like what's good about what foods and then what's bad about other foods, and it just puts everything on this spectrum where there are better and worse choices for everything. And I think that that's going to teach people basically how to do this. It's something you already know because it's just a skill you've learned. Like you can just walk in the grocery store and every single thing in there, you've got a pretty good idea about what the macros are, how full it'll make you, how hungry it'll make you, whether it's going to take you closer or farther away from your goals. But your average person, just, think about how dumb the average person is, and then half the planet's dumber than that. Like they don't know what to eat. They're just going to Starbucks and getting a Trenta frap, right? Like how do you decide? So I think this just really helps people, give them tools to like basically make better choices, honestly.
100%. And I was just thinking that I wish we had something like that, because you said, yes, now we know and we have the skill, but how long did that take us? And that's great because we've acquired wisdom and we're here now. However, it doesn't need to take you that long necessarily with technology.
Right.
If you use that to your advantage, like something like Carver app, then that could be a true game changer. And you're just going to be able to learn faster because ultimately you get more awareness and there's more to it. Like you say, it's not just as simple as protein and calories, the quality of the food, the volume, as you say, the amount of sugar in certain foods and everything else all make a massive, and not to mention, which is another rabbit hole, performance in the gym. I notice I need to have more carbs basically the night before in the morning, and I perform way better, so those things you can fine tune them, right? Once you've got that, the fundamentals locked in.
Yep.
100%. Hey, Ted, awesome, man. Really, really enjoyed that. I always learn something from you myself, and I'm sure once again, the audience got a ton of value from this. Where can the audience find you? And if there's anything you want to kind of shout out, then go ahead, my man.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah. Well, I'm on all the socials at Ted Naiman, on X and Instagram and that kind of thing. And I'm basically working with Dr. Einfeld. You can check out the app at hava.co. And I'm also writing a book called Satiety per Calorie that just kind of spells out how all of this stuff works. Of course, I wrote the PE Diet, which is a book you can buy pretty much anywhere. And I still think protein percentage of calories is the single most important factor when it comes to ad-lib caloric intake. So the PE diet was just kind of the beginning though, because satiety per calorie, it builds on that and then adds in carbon, fat density and fiber and all these hedonic factors that I didn't really cover so much in the PE diet. So but yeah, that's going to come out hopefully later this year. And you can check out the website at satietypercalorie.com and to just get a little teaser for what's going to be in there.
Awesome. Thanks again, Ted.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Great to talk to you.
Last chance to get your free metabolic assessment. This is exclusive for everyone in my podcast audience. Do not miss this opportunity. All you've got to do to get your free metabolic score and game plan, which is going to help you get the fastest, most effective results possible, is just click the link beneath in the show notes. Hope you enjoyed the episode.